Captain Rebecca Hayes was jolted awake by the metallic knock echoing through the hull of her ship. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness of her quarters, heart already pounding. 3 years living in Docking Bay 47 had taught her one thing. Nobody knocked at 3 in the morning unless something was very wrong. The Silver Dawn wasn't much to look at. The cargo hauler had seen better decades, with rust patches on the exterior and a hyperdrive that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. But it was hers. Every dent, every jury-rigged repair, every improvised fix that kept her flying. She ran supplies between mining colonies in the outer spiral, hauling protein packs, replacement parts, and whatever else people needed to survive out here on the edge of known space. The pay was terrible, but it kept her invisible. That's what mattered when you had a deserter's warrant from the Terran Defense Fleet branded across your name. The knock came again. Louder this time. More insistent. Rebecca rolled out of her bunk, her hand instinctively reaching for the plasma pistol she kept mounted on the wall. Her fingers wrapped around the familiar grip as her bare feet hit the cold metal floor. She moved quietly through the cramped corridor, years of military training making her steps silent despite her racing pulse. Through the small viewport in the hatch, she could see a figure standing outside. Tall. Broad. The dim station lighting caught the metallic sheen of its body. Unit 9. Her neighbor from Bay 46. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. In 8 months of living next to each other, they'd barely interacted. A nod here. A brief glance there. That was it. Unit 9 was a Cybertech Coalition operative, and those things made most humans deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't just the way they looked, half machine, half something that used to be alive. It was what they represented. The Coalition had been expanding aggressively for years, swallowing up independent colonies, forcing species into compliance. And the Cybertech units were their enforcers. So why was one knocking on her door in the middle of the night? Rebecca's grip tightened on her pistol. She keyed the intercom with her free hand. Little late for a social call. Captain Hayes. The voice that came through the speaker was flat, synthesized, stripped of anything human. I require your assistance. Every instinct Rebecca had screamed at her to walk away. To pretend she wasn't home. To ignore this until it went away. Coalition operatives didn't ask for help. They took what they wanted. But curiosity had always been her weakness. She opened the hatch halfway, keeping her body behind it, weapon raised and ready. The safety was off. Her finger rested just above the trigger. Unit 9 stood in the harsh white light of the station corridor. Up close, it was even more unsettling than from a distance. Its body was a patchwork of metal plating and synthetic skin that didn't quite match, like someone had tried to make a machine look human but given up halfway. The optical sensors that served as eyes glowed a cold blue, casting eerie shadows across its face. When it moved its head, Rebecca could hear the soft clicking of servo joints, the quiet hum of internal processors working. Not interested, Rebecca said, starting to close the hatch. I can erase your military record. Rebecca's hand froze. Her entire body went rigid. Unit 9 sensors focused on her with unsettling precision. Every trace, every file, every warrant. You would be free. The words hung in the air between them. Free. Such a simple word. Such an impossible promise. For 3 years Rebecca had been running. Never staying anywhere too long. Never making connections. Never using her real credentials. Always looking over her shoulder, waiting for the day the Terran Defense Fleet caught up with her. Keep talking, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need transport to Coalition warship dominance. I need your ship. I need you. Unit 9 paused, and in that moment of silence, Rebecca swore she heard something almost human in the mechanical voice. In exchange, full amnesty, 50,000 credits, and a clean identity anywhere in the galaxy. Rebecca's mind raced. This was insane. Had to be a trap. Coalition operatives didn't go rogue. They didn't offer deals to human deserters. They followed orders, completed missions, and crushed anyone who got in their way. Why would a Coalition operative need help from a human deserter? She asked, keeping her weapon trained on Unit 9's chest. Not that it would do much good against all that armor, but it made her feel better. Unit 9's head tilted slightly, a gesture that was disturbingly organic. Because the Coalition is conducting experiments on your species. Torture masked as research. And The synthetic voice changed, modulated in a way Rebecca had never heard from a Cybertech unit before. It almost sounded like pain. Like guilt. I cannot allow it to continue. Rebecca stared at the machine standing in her doorway. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was a setup. That she should slam the hatch and run as far as the Silver Dawn could take her. But something else stirred in her chest, something she'd buried 3 years ago when she deserted. The part of her that still believed some fights were worth fighting. "You've got 10 minutes to convince me," Rebecca said, stepping aside. "Get in." Unit 9 moved past her into the ship, its heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor. Rebecca closed the hatch behind them, sealing herself in with a coalition operative in what was probably the worst decision of her life. But maybe, just maybe, it was also the right one. Unit 9 stepped into Rebecca's ship, and immediately she noticed something strange. Despite its massive frame and all that metal, it moved carefully, deliberately, like it was afraid of breaking something. The cyborg navigated through the cramped cabin, ducking under low pipes, sidestepping stacks of cargo containers, avoiding every obstacle with an awareness that seemed almost impossible for something so large. Rebecca kept her distance, weapon still in hand. She watched as Unit 9 reached toward its left forearm. There was a soft hiss as a panel slid open, revealing a small compartment hidden beneath the synthetic skin. The cyborg pulled out a data chip, no bigger than Rebecca's thumbnail, and held it out. "Show this to no one else," Unit 9 said, its mechanical fingers trembling slightly as it handed over the chip. Rebecca took it, feeling the cold metal against her palm. She moved to her main console, the one she used for navigation and communications. Her hands hesitated over the port for just a moment. Once she plugged this in, there was no going back. No pretending she hadn't seen whatever was on it. She pushed the chip in. The screen flickered to life and Rebecca's world tilted. The first video showed a stark white room. Clinical. Cold. Sterile. In the center stood a human man, maybe 30 years old, wearing nothing but a thin medical gown. His eyes were wide with terror as scientists in protective suits backed away. Then the walls opened. Not into another room. Into space itself. Hard vacuum. The man's screams were silent as the air was sucked from the chamber. Rebecca's military training had taught her what happened to unprotected humans in vacuum. The body should have lasted maybe 15 seconds. This man lasted over 3 minutes, his body convulsing, fighting, refusing to die as quickly as it should. The second video was worse. A woman strapped to a metal table, exposed to an atmosphere so toxic it turned the air green. Her skin blistered immediately, huge welts rising across her arms and face. But she didn't die. For 7 agonizing minutes, Rebecca watched her struggle against the restraints, her body somehow adapting, fighting back against poison that should have killed her in seconds. There were more videos. Dozens of them. Different humans. Different tortures disguised as tests. Extreme heat. Crushing pressure. Radiation that should have liquefied their organs. And in every single one, humans lasted longer than they should have. Longer than any other species the Coalition had tested. Rebecca felt bile rising in her throat. She gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white, trying to keep herself steady. "The Coalition calls it Project Endurance," Unit 9 said from behind her. The mechanical voice somehow sounded hollow. "Empty. They've tested this on 17 different species. Humans outlast them all. Every single time. Why?" Rebecca's voice came out as a whisper. "Why are they doing this? They're not trying to understand human biology. They're not trying to help." Unit 9 moved closer, and Rebecca could hear the whir of servos, the click of metal joints. "They're weaponizing it. There are documents in that chip. Plans. The Coalition intends to infect entire human colonies with engineered pathogens. Force rapid evolution through catastrophic casualties. Then harvest the survivors for their augmentation programs." The words hung in the air like poison. Rebecca turned slowly, looking at the cyborg with new horror. "You're telling me they want to turn humans into weapons? Into soldiers? Into servants? Into whatever they need?" Unit 9's head lowered, and for a moment it looked like shame. 47 colonies are marked for Phase 1. Over 8 billion people. The operation begins in 3 weeks. Rebecca felt cold rage spreading through her chest, replacing the horror. It was a familiar feeling. The same anger that had made her desert 3 years ago when her commanding officer had ordered her to fire on civilian transports. "Why do you care? You're one of them. You're Coalition." "No." The word came out sharp. Definite. Unit 9's hand twitched, a very human gesture that looked wrong on its metal frame. "I was human once. My name was..." The cyborg paused, and Rebecca heard something break in that synthesized voice. "My name was David Chin. They told me the cybertech program was voluntary. That I'd be helping humanity. That I'd still be me." David raised one hand, staring at it like it belonged to someone else. "They lied. Most of what made me David is gone now. My memories are fragmented. My emotions are processed through algorithms. But enough remains. Enough to know this is wrong. Rebecca studied him, and yes, it was him now, not it, with completely different eyes. She saw the way his hands trembled, and she knew it wasn't a mechanical malfunction. It was rage. Pure, human rage fighting its way through circuits and code. She saw the way he held himself, shoulders slumped forward like a man carrying weight too heavy to bear. Like someone trying desperately not to break apart. "What's the plan?" Rebecca asked. David's optical sensors brightened slightly. Hope maybe. Or relief that she was listening. "The Dominance accepts supply runs from independent haulers 3 times a week. Your ship, your credentials, your unremarkable human status, it can get us close. I hide in a cargo container. Once we're aboard, I infiltrate their systems. I download everything. Every file. Every communication. Every piece of evidence. And then we broadcast it. Every government. Every colony. Every open channel in the galaxy. We make it impossible for the coalition to bury this." Rebecca crossed her arms, thinking it through. "They'll kill us if we're caught. You know that, right?" "Yes." No hesitation. No doubts. Just yes. David's head tilted. "If we succeed?" Rebecca looked back at the screen, at the frozen image of a human woman fighting against impossible odds. At proof of torture dressed up as science. At plans to murder billions. She thought about the orders she'd refused 3 years ago. The career she'd thrown away because she couldn't stomach following commands that violated everything she believed in. Maybe she'd been running for too long. Maybe this was her chance to stop hiding and start fighting back. "All right," she said, turning to face David fully. "We leave in 6 hours. I'll need time to forge the supply manifests and file a flight plan." "And David?" She allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Try not to die in my cargo bay. I just cleaned it." For the first time since stepping aboard, something changed in David's voice. The flatness lifted, just slightly, replaced by something that sounded almost like humor. Almost like the man he used to be. "I'll do my best, Captain." Rebecca nodded and turned back to her console. 6 hours to prepare for probable suicide. But maybe, just maybe, it would be worth it. The Dominance filled Rebecca's viewport like a nightmare made real. It was massive, easily 50 times the size of her little cargo hauler, all sharp angles and dark metal that seemed to swallow the starlight around it. Weapon ports dotted its hull like black eyes, each one capable of turning the Silver Dawn into debris in a heartbeat. Rebecca had flown combat missions during her time with the Terran Defense Fleet. She'd been shot at, chased, nearly killed more times than she cared to count. But this felt different. Back then she'd been following orders. Now she was making a choice. A personal one. And somehow that made her heart pound harder against her ribs. Her hands stayed steady on the controls though. Years of training wouldn't let them shake, even if everything inside her was screaming to turn around and run. "Silver Dawn, this is Dominance Flight Control. Transmit cargo manifest for inspection." The voice that crackled through her comm was flat, bored. Just another routine supply run to whoever was sitting in that control tower. Rebecca took a breath and sent the falsified documents David had prepared. Standard stuff. Medical supplies, replacement parts, protein packs for the crew. Nothing that would raise an eyebrow. Nothing worth a second glance. Manifest received. Stand by for automated scan. This was it. The moment everything could fall apart. Rebecca's eyes locked onto her console screen as the progress bar appeared, showing the coalition scanners sweeping across her ship. David had spent 2 hours modifying the shielding on Container 7, layering it with materials that should mask his presence. Should being the key word. Coalition scanners were thorough. They were designed to catch smugglers, weapons, anything that didn't belong. The percentage climbed slowly. Too slowly. Rebecca forced herself to breathe normally, to not grip the controls too tight. Any sign of nervousness and they'd know something was wrong. 50%. 60. 75. Rebecca glanced at the cargo bay monitor. Container 7 sat there, looking completely ordinary among the others. Inside it, she knew David was powered down to minimal function, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. 82%. 91%. The screen flashed red. Anomaly detected. Rebecca's stomach dropped, but she kept her face neutral. In her ear, the controller's voice came back, sharp now, suspicious. "Silver Dawn, we're reading an irregular mass signature in Container 7. Explain." Her mind kicked into overdrive. Panic wouldn't help. Fear wouldn't help. She needed to think like a tired cargo hauler who dealt with faulty equipment 1,000 times before. "Yeah, I flagged that in the notes. Rebecca said, letting annoyance creep into her voice. Got some faulty medical equipment in there. Scanning systems keep glitching. That's the whole reason it's being returned to you guys for repair. Silence on the other end. Stretched too long. Rebecca could almost hear them checking her story, pulling up files, looking for the notes she'd supposedly filed. Silver Dawn, hold position. We're dispatching a security team for physical inspection. No, that couldn't happen. If they opened that container, they'd find David. Game over. Both of them dead. Rebecca let frustration flood her voice. Real frustration because this wasn't acting anymore. Look, I've been hauling cargo for 12 straight hours. My back is killing me. Your automated system already cleared this exact cargo yesterday when I filed the preliminary manifest. Check your logs. Authorization code Delta 77. There is no authorization code Delta 77 in our system. Then somebody in your system screwed up, and I'm not sitting out here while you people figure out whose fault it is. Rebecca's voice rose slightly, hitting that perfect note of tired irritation that every bureaucrat in the galaxy understood. I get paid by delivery, not by the hour. You want this cargo or not? Because I've got 3 other runs scheduled this week, and I'm not losing money because of your paperwork problems. She held her breath. This was the gamble. Humans understood bureaucratic frustration better than most species. The coalition employed thousands of different races, and dealing with paperwork across that many cultures was a nightmare. Mistakes happened constantly. And nobody wanted to be the one blamed for holding up a routine delivery over what was probably just a filing error. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Fine. Bay 12. Docking clearance granted. The controller's voice was tight with irritation. But if there's another anomaly during unloading, you're getting a full inspection. Mark my words. Understood. Silver Dawn proceeding to Bay 12. And hey, maybe check with your supervisor about that authorization code. Someone's dropping balls up there. Rebecca cut the comm before they could respond and allowed herself one shaky breath. First hurdle cleared. Barely. The Silver Dawn glided into the docking bay, mag clamps engaging with a solid thunk. Through her monitors, Rebecca watched coalition personnel moving around the bay, loading equipment, checking manifests. Everything routine. Everything normal. She opened the cargo bay doors remotely, then triggered the release on Container 7. Inside, David's optical sensors flickered to life. He'd heard everything through the container walls. Heard Rebecca talk them past the inspection. Now it was his turn. The container opened with a soft hiss. David moved into the shadows of the bay, his body shifting between cargo stacks with a grace that shouldn't be possible for something his size. This was where his remaining humanity gave him an edge. His movements weren't purely mechanical anymore. They had intent, purpose, emotion. The coalition's security algorithms were designed to spot mechanical movement patterns. They weren't programmed to recognize something that was part machine, part desperate man. David reached a maintenance corridor 3 levels down. The ship's layout was burned into his memory from his days helping design coalition vessels. His fingers, still partially flesh beneath the synthetic covering, found a data terminal hidden behind an access panel. He interfaced directly, his consciousness diving into the coalition network like a swimmer plunging into dark water. Firewalls rose to meet him. Encryption locked him out. But David had built some of these systems years ago, back when he still had a fully human body. Back when he believed he was helping make the galaxy safer. He knew every backdoor, every weakness, every shortcut. The defenses crumbled. The encryption shattered. He was in. And what he found made even his mechanical heart stutter. Project Endurance wasn't just 47 colonies. The files showed 112 human worlds marked for potential testing. Phase 1 targeted the 47 most isolated ones. Places where millions would die before anyone could respond. The viral agents were already manufactured. Already loaded onto ships. Already positioned near their targets. 3 weeks. That's all the time left. David downloaded everything. Every file. Every schematic. Every communication between coalition officials. Names, dates, locations. Evidence that couldn't be denied. That's when the alarm exploded through the ship. Intruder in Section 9. All units respond. David's sensors registered armed personnel converging on his location. But worse than that was the voice that came over the intercom. Cold. Familiar. A voice from his past. Commander Vex. Head of Coalition Security. The man who'd overseen David's conversion into Unit 9. Check the coding signature on that breach. I know those patterns. A pause that felt like eternity. David Chin. So you finally grew a conscience. How a human of you. David ran. Rebecca was in the cargo bay stacking fake supply crates to make everything look legitimate when the alarms erupted. The sound was deafening, a piercing wail that echoed through the entire Coalition warship. Red emergency lights bathed everything in crimson. Her hands froze for half a second, then her training took over. 3 years away from the military hadn't erased the instincts drilled into her during combat operations. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She slapped the emergency release on her pistol's magnetic holster and the weapon dropped into her palm. Then she was running, boots pounding against metal floors, heading straight toward the maintenance corridor where David had disappeared. She found him 3 sections over and her heart nearly stopped. David was limping badly, dragging his left leg behind him like dead weight. Plasma burns scorched across his chest and shoulders, the metal plating melted and twisted. Sparks flew from exposed wiring. One of his optical sensors flickered erratically, damaged but still functioning. Behind him, 4 Coalition soldiers advanced in formation, weapons raised, moving with mechanical precision. Rebecca didn't waste time announcing herself. She raised her pistol and fired. Her first shot caught the nearest soldier square in the chest. The energy bolt punched through his armor and he went down hard, not moving. The other 3 scattered immediately, diving for cover behind support columns and equipment crates. Rebecca fired again, keeping them pinned, giving David precious seconds. "Move!" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the alarms. David staggered toward her, his movements jerky and wrong. "Cannot, leg servos damaged," his voice came out in broken fragments, glitching between words. "Motor function compromised." "Then I'll get you moving." Rebecca's eyes swept the corridor looking for anything useful. There, mounted on the wall was a maintenance exoskeleton, the kind dock workers used for moving heavy cargo. She grabbed it, ripping it free from its charging port, and dropped to her knees beside David's damaged leg. Her fingers flew across the exoskeleton's frame, attaching mag clamps to David's leg plating, wrapping wire around servo joints, connecting power feeds. It was ugly work, improvised and desperate, but muscle memory guided her hands. She'd done 1,000 field repairs during her military service, patching damaged equipment under fire. This was just another repair. Just another emergency. "Can you walk?" she asked, not looking up from her work. David put weight on the jury-rigged leg. The exoskeleton whined in protest, motors straining, but it held. His leg moved. Not smoothly but enough. "Affirmative." "Then let's go." They ran. Or rather, Rebecca ran and David moved as fast as his damaged body could manage. Behind them, Coalition soldiers poured into the corridors like angry insects from a kicked nest. Dozens of them, maybe more, all armed and looking for blood. Rebecca's mind shifted into combat mode. She wasn't thinking anymore, just reacting, using every dirty trick she'd learned during her years in the fleet. She shot out a power coupling as they passed it, and the corridor behind them plunged into darkness. Soldiers shouted in confusion, their night vision struggling to compensate. 2 sections later, she spotted an atmosphere control panel. She smashed it open and triggered an emergency vent. Air screamed out through vents, pressure dropping rapidly. The soldiers behind them had to seal that section off or risk getting pulled into space. It bought them another minute. They turned a corner and nearly ran into 3 more soldiers. Rebecca dropped to one knee, firing low while David swung his good arm in a wide arc. Between them they cleared the corridor in seconds. "You're good at this," David said, his voice still glitching but carrying something that might have been admiration. "Yeah, well, they trained me to fight a war," Rebecca panted, reloading her weapon. "They never said which side I'd end up on." She spotted a support beam ahead, fired at its weak point, and brought an entire section of ceiling crashing down behind them. It wouldn't stop their pursuers for long, but every second counted. They burst into the docking bay and Rebecca's hope died in her chest. The Silver Dawn sat exactly where she'd left it, but it wasn't alone anymore. Coalition fighters had scrambled around it, at least 8 of them, pilots climbing into cockpits, engines warming up. Her ship was trapped. Surrounded. There was no way out. "Suggestions?" she asked David, already knowing they were out of options. David's damaged sensors focused on the massive bay doors that separated them from the void of space. "Open those doors. Depressurization will scatter their fighters." Rebecca stared at him. "That'll scatter us too. We'll get pulled out into space. Your ship has stronger magnetic clamps than theirs. It's built for rough docking. And you're human." David's voice steadied, became clearer. "Your reaction time is better than their automated systems expect. You can do this." A grin spread across Rebecca's face despite everything. It was an absolutely terrible plan. Insane. Suicidal. Which meant it was exactly the kind of plan that might actually work. She aimed at the bay door controls and fired. The explosion ripped through the control mechanism, sparks showering everywhere. Alarms reached a fever pitch. The massive bay doors began sliding open, slowly at first, then faster. Atmosphere exploded outward. The roar was deafening. Coalition fighters that weren't properly secured tumbled and spun, pilots screaming as their ships were torn from their moorings and flung into space. Equipment flew past. Personnel not strapped down went sailing toward the opening doors. The Silver Dawn held. Its mag clamps groaned and strained, but they held. Rebecca and David used the chaos as cover, running through the hurricane of escaping air. Rebecca's lungs burned, but she kept moving, half dragging David when his damaged leg failed. They reached the Silver Dawn's hatch, sealed it behind them, and Rebecca was in the pilot's seat before her hands stopped shaking. Hang on. She released the mag clamps. The ship shot forward like a bullet, diving away from the dominance. Immediately, she angled toward a nearby asteroid field, weaving between massive rocks that would tear any pursuing ship apart. Coalition fighters gave chase, but not for long. The asteroid field was dense, chaotic, unpredictable. Their automated navigation system screamed warnings, telling them to pull back, that the risk was too high. But Rebecca was human. She didn't need safe flight paths calculated by computers. She flew on instinct, on feeling, threading the Silver Dawn through gaps that shouldn't exist, trusting her reflexes over logic. The ship groaned. Alarms blared. Asteroids scraped against the hull, leaving long scars in the metal. But they made it through. Coordinates set for deep space, Rebecca said, finally allowing herself to breathe. We're clear. Then she turned and saw David slumped in the co-pilot's chair. Dark fluids leaked from multiple wounds in his chassis. His breathing, that mechanical approximation of breathing, came in shallow, irregular gasps. David? His optical sensors flickered, struggling to focus on her face. Downloaded, everything. Need to transmit. We will, Rebecca promised, reaching for his hand. Just hold on. Please. But she could see the truth in those dying lights. David Chin was running out of time. They had maybe an hour. Probably less. Rebecca could see it in the way David's systems were shutting down, one after another. His organic components were failing faster than she could patch them, and his mechanical parts were too damaged to sustain him alone. It was like watching someone bleed out in slow motion, except the blood was hydraulic fluid and coolant. Help me, to the communications array, David said, his voice cutting in and out like a bad radio signal. Rebecca didn't argue. She moved to his side and wrapped her arm around him, taking most of his weight. He was heavy, far heavier than any human, but adrenaline and desperation gave her strength. They moved through the narrow corridors of the Silver Dawn step by painful step. Every second felt precious. Every breath mattered. At the console, David's fingers trembled as he reached for the controls. Rebecca had never seen him move with uncertainty before. During their entire mission he'd been precise, mechanical, efficient. But now his hands shook. Now he fumbled with switches and buttons like someone who'd forgotten how to use them. Because he wasn't a machine anymore. He was a dying man trying to do one last thing that mattered. This will broadcast on every open channel, David explained, pausing between words to gather strength. Coalition channels. Human channels. Independent networks. Every government, every colony, every ship in range. His optical sensors flickered. They can't silence all of them. Rebecca watched him work, her throat tight. The Coalition will trace this transmission back to us. You know that? Yes. David's hands kept moving across the console, entering commands, setting parameters. But by then, his voice glitched hard, distorting into static before clearing again. Everyone will know. Rebecca reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. The metal plating was cold under her palm, lifeless like touching a refrigerator. But underneath all that machinery, beneath the circuits and the synthetic components, she thought she could feel something warm. Something alive. Something that had never stopped being human, no matter how much the Coalition had tried to take it away. Do it, she said softly. David's finger hovered over the transmit button for just a moment. One last hesitation. One final human doubt. Then he pressed it. The console lit up like a Christmas tree. Data streamed outward from the Silver Dawn in every direction, riding every frequency, using every channel. The transmission spread like wildfire, jumping from relay to relay, impossible to stop or contain. Across the galaxy, On 1,000 different worlds and 10,000 different ships, the data packet arrived. People opened it, watched it, saw everything. The footage of humans being tortured in the name of science. The lists of 47 colonies marked for viral infection. The communications between coalition commanders planning genocide dressed up as research. Names, dates, locations, proof. Everything laid bare for everyone to see. The response was instant and explosive. Human colonies went to maximum alert. Defense fleets that had been scattered suddenly mobilized, forming a unified front that hadn't existed in decades. Independent governments that had stayed neutral demanded answers from the coalition. Species that had allied with the cybertech coalition began withdrawing support, horrified by what they'd unknowingly been part of. The coalition's political structure, built on alliances and cooperation, fractured within hours. On Earth, in the halls of the Terran Defense Fleet headquarters, an emergency meeting ended with a priority broadcast. Captain Rebecca Hayes, deserter and fugitive, was to be granted full amnesty and recognition for extraordinary service to humanity. Her crimes were erased. Her name was cleared. She was a hero. But Rebecca wasn't watching any of that. She turned off the news feeds. Silenced the incoming messages. Right now, none of it mattered. She was sitting beside David as his systems failed one by one. Lights went dark. Motors went silent. The soft hum that had always surrounded him faded away. Did we succeed? David asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Rebecca's vision blurred with tears she hadn't expected. Yeah, she said, her voice thick and breaking. Yeah, David. We did it. Every human colony knows what the coalition planned. They're mobilizing. They're ready. The coalition can't touch them now. David's optical sensors dimmed, the blue glow fading to almost nothing. Good. That's good. Why did you really do this? Rebecca asked, the question she'd been holding back finally coming out. You could have stayed hidden. Could have kept your head down. Stayed safe. Why risk everything? David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible, each word an effort. Because I remembered what it meant to be human. To protect the pack. To do what's right, even when it costs everything. His hand moved slightly, fingers twitching. Rebecca took it without thinking, holding tight. Metal and flesh. Human and machine. Cold and warm. It didn't matter anymore. In this moment, they were just two people who'd fought together. Thank you, David whispered, for helping me be human, one last time. His optical sensors went dark. The software of his internal systems fell silent. David's chin was gone. Rebecca sat there for a long time, holding his hand, not wanting to let go. Her neighbor. Her partner. Her friend. The cyborg who'd knocked on her hatch in the middle of the night with an impossible deal. 3 months later, the Silver Dawn docked at a new station in a new sector, far from Coalition space. Rebecca had rebuilt her ship, repaired the damage, upgraded the systems. But there was one thing she kept exactly as it was. David's memory core sat on her console, carefully preserved. Sometimes, late at night when the loneliness got too heavy, she'd talk to it. Tell him about the changes sweeping across the galaxy. How human colonies had united like never before, forming alliances and defense pacts. How other species now looked at humanity with new respect and maybe a little fear. How the coalition still existed but diminished, its power broken, Project Endurance dead and buried. Every operative in the galaxy now knew the truth. Humans don't just survive. They remember. They fight back. And most importantly, they protect their own. Even when their own is a cyborg who knocked on a hatch and offered a deal. Rebecca picked up the memory core, holding it carefully. We showed them, didn't we, David? We showed them what humanity really means. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly in every direction. The Silver Dawn's engines hummed, ready to fly. And somewhere in that vast darkness, Rebecca knew humans were watching. Waiting. United. She set the memory core back in its place and returned to the pilot's seat. There was work to do. Places to go. Maybe more impossible deals to accept. The Silver Dawn flew on, carrying the memory of the man who'd been machine but chose to be human when it mattered most.